let's just make this real. Imagine you're sitting down with one of your good friends and you're having a conversation. Maybe it's even a coworker, your partner, and everything's going great. And then all of a sudden, something comes out of their mouth and you're like, excuse me? It's like, how could you even think that, much less say that out loud? And you just kind of want to get up and be like, okay. Well, you know, oftentimes we're in a conversation with someone and they make a statement. And then we're in that mindset that, okay, this isn't going to be good and it's going to turn into something that's divisive. And we want to point the finger at them. But you want to know what? It's how we respond to that conversation that decides whether our conversation or that disagreement does become divisive. We have an opportunity, instead of waiting for them, to think about how we show up differently. And so I ask each of you to think about, how can you show up with space, pace, and grace to make sure that those comments don't derail your conversation? And so the space is trying to think about, how do you flip your switch when they've said something that pushes your button and you're just like, oh, you know, how do you compose yourself in order to think, it's what I call the MRI, the most respectful intentions. Maybe their intention wasn't to push your button. Maybe they just had a message to share, but your brain or your experiences came up with something maybe that wasn't there. Sometimes we make things up. But sometimes we have to remember that there's not just our truth. There's multiple truths. And we have to remember that. Because when we remember that, it gives us some space to respond versus to react. And that is where the pace comes in. Pace is thinking about, how do we show up differently and engage them so that the conversation doesn't become divisive? And one of the best ways to do that is just to paraphrase what you heard them say. Okay? What I heard you say when you were talking about that change was that this was important to you. Your volume was going up in your voice and I could see your arms going, that this change was really important to you. And then you can ask them, did I get that right? And if they're like, yeah, you did, then ask them another question. Tell me more about that change. But when you ask them that question and they're like, yeah, no, Nan, you totally missed the boat there, then you can just look at them and say, what did I miss? Now, the pace relates to the space because we're slowing down the conversation. It gives you a chance to let whatever they said crash into you and then recede before you think about what you are going to say with grace. Because how do you disagree or move that conversation forward when they've said something that really does make you that uncomfortable? And one of the easiest ways to do that is just to find some level of agreement with what they've said. You can make the comment that, yeah, that change has been really hard. The last 3 years have been difficult. And then it's the old improv trick. Does any of you know what the old improv trick is? It's turning the but into an and. I'm sure most of you have heard this. Instead of saying that's really been hard, but get over it, I could maybe say something like, that's really been hard. And what do you think it would take to move on? Sometimes it's some really simple communication tweaks is all it takes to think about how we can take a conversation that can completely disrail because they've said something that we think they should either take back or apologize for, but we'd be waiting a long time for that to happen. So if we want that conversation to move forward, why don't we step in and own the situation with some space, pace, and grace?